Mr. Joe.
Bonsoir, bonsoir.
Bonsoir, monsieur.
Yes, so anyone is yes. Okay. I'll just make you the host and step out. So I've made Pascal co-host already.
Okay. Thank you,
Mm.
sir. Have a wonderful evening.
And you too. Enjoy your meeting.
Yes, I'll try. Hello, Pascal.
Yes, Ebuka, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Um, yeah. So I called previously just to be sure that the logistics are in place, but and I keep missing the time because I'm 1 hour ahead. So I tried to join before. I thought that was 6 p.m., not knowing, so it's always confusing. But yeah, thank God we started it.
Okay, it's okay. No problem.
I think Dr. Renner is here. I can see somebody else. Yeah, okay. As usual, we need to.
Good evening, Pascal. Good evening, Ebuka. Honor.
Yeah, good
I
evening,
do.
Dr. Renner. You're welcome.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Dr. Renner, thank you so much for joining and for accepting to cascade this session.
No problem at all.
Yeah. So I think we have 4 minutes more to the
Yeah, 4 minutes more.
yeah.
I'm posting a reminder on the group. And then,
Okay. Are you able to share your are you able to present the PowerPoint for Dr. Anna?
okay. Should I do that for me, eh?
Yeah, because he sent it to you already, so maybe you
Okay,
want
okay.
to yeah to make it
Let me
easy for
open
you.
it up. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. How are we doing today? How are we doing today? Please, if you can hear me, I want you to go to the chat room and type 1 in the chat room. If you can hear me, go to the chat room and type 1. Yes, yes. A very wonderful evening to us all. And also, happy Easter to our Christian brothers and sisters in the meeting. Happy Easter to us all. So, we're about to start in a few minutes' time. We're going to get started. As usual, I want us to go to the WhatsApp group, post a reminder on that group. I give you permission to do that so that people that have not yet joined, they can join in immediately in the meeting. Okay? So within a few minutes, you can go to the WhatsApp group, post a reminder, tell them that the meeting has started. Tell them that the meeting has started. Just in the next 2 minutes, we are getting started. So I give us the permission, go to the group chat, post on the group chat, tell them that the meeting has started so that everybody can join it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So far, so good. How was our day today? How was the day today? My day was fine. It was excellent. Yes, although we had a little bit of rain today, and the weather is so cool, unlike the time when the weather was very, very hot. Right now, the weather is very, very cool. Yes. So, guys, I'm not yet seeing our post on the WhatsApp group. I'm not yet seeing our post there. Okay, it's already, the 2 minutes have already elapsed. So we're going to get started right away. Give me a minute. Okay, so please confirm if you can hear me and you can see me now. Confirm if you can hear me and you can see me.
Yeah, you can see it.
All right, thank you, thank you. So without no further waste of time, we're going to get started right away. We are honored to introduce our facilitators for today. Who is already in the meeting here with us already. Now, he's a distinguished person in the field of neurodiversity awareness, right? Now, he's a distinguished consultant, uh, he's a distinguished consultant pediatrician and a fellow of the West African College of Physicians. He's also widely known as the noisy Niger pediatrician, right? And he's also a powerhouse in the child health advocacy and the digital health education. Now, as the Gates Foundation goalkeeper, his work is at the forefront of health, equity, and child survival across the continent. This person in question will be leading us in today's topic, which is the science of neurodiversity, breaking down the clinical and the neurological foundations essential for understanding the neurodivergent development. So without no further ado, I want us to go to the chat room, drop in our favorite emoji, put in some fire there in the chat room as we make welcome on stage Dr. Ayodele Renner. Yes.
Thank you so much,
The
Pascal,
floor is
for your very
yours.
kind. Yes, thank you very much, Pascal, for your very kind introduction, and thank you very much to all the participants. I hope you have found this course on neurodiversity awareness to be very valuable and very helpful, and to help us to change our mindsets and thinking, as I have had to do over the years, as it relates to neurodiversity and our, fellow citizens living with neurodiversity. My name is Dr. Ayodele Renner, as Pascal has already said, and I'm a consultant pediatrician and I work in the government sector. Now, as a way of introducing what exactly it is that got me interested in neurodiversity, or how neurodiversity is topical, as a medical student, all we knew was pervasive developmental disorders. That was what we called neurodiversity. We call them pervasive developmental disorders. And that included autism, Asperger's, and the like. The term neurodiversity was not something that I heard when I was in medical school, and I finished medical school in 2008. Please don't try to calculate my age. Even throughout residency, and I finished residency in 2017. The term neurodiversity was not something that was used throughout specialization training in Luth. And that is because the concept is, as in terms of how awareness and global understanding of neurodiversity as the explanation for conditions like autism, for conditions like obsessive compulsive disorder, for conditions like Asperger's syndrome, neurodiversity as a concept in mainstream is really not up to 10 years old. Is really not up to 10 years old. Yes, the idea has been in development forever, and I'm sure you have done the history, as well. But for it not to have reached us who were training to be specialists in 2017, then it means that in relative scientific terms, it's a relatively recent development. And this just means that science is something that is continuously evolving, continuously trying to answer questions, and continuously trying to find ways to make sure that people live happier, healthier, and more fulfilled lives. And so that's why we are here, to make sure that we are understanding neurodiversity and its science. Now, this is the outline that we're going to be following. And so hopefully this will be an interactive session. I need you to just put a few things in the chat box so that we are all participating actively. I sent a little bit of an exercise to do yesterday, but I came in quite late, so I have no qualms that, I haven't seen any entries. But hopefully we can answer a few of the questions here. I imagine that this should take me 30 minutes, so I could just do 15 minutes for questions and answers as well, if there are any. Okay, so before we define neurodiversity, this is the outline. Can we just put in the chat box what exactly do we think? How would we define science in 1 minute? How do you think we should, how would you define science? What exactly is science to you? I mean, this is not a trick question and there are no right or wrong answers. I just want you to tell me what you feel science is. Okay? So let's just talk about what exactly science is. So science is life. Thank you, Tonya. Science is life. That I think I have no arguments there. I have no notes to add to that. So science definitely is life. Science helps us to understand life. Yes. Any other takers? Any other comments? So what exactly is science to you? So science to me is a field of study that uses structured steps and methods to get answers to life, physics, and all. So I think that is also very brilliant. Shea Badmus, thank you so much for that response. So science really is that field of study that has clear-cut methods to help us to understand the life around us. Okay, thank you so much. Any other definitions that we can have for science? Was this actually going to help us to understand, why this is important for neurodiversity? Any other comments on what we think science is? What exactly is science? Okay, as it comes to you, please just put it in the chat box. Thank you very much, Tony and Shay. I think the reason why I've decided that, we should try to, define science is that, every scientific endeavor starts with a question. Every scientific endeavor starts with a question. So for me, if I ask the people I'm teaching, whether it's my medical officers or a medical student or any group of people, I generally am more enthusiastic about the kinds of questions that they ask rather than the fact that they have all the book knowledge in their heads. The kinds of questions that we ask tell us about the kinds of problems that we're trying to. So science is a systematic study of nature as well. Thank you so much, Tonya. About how we approach the world. The science is a way of understanding the world around us. Thank you so much, Fatima. So that essentially is a way of, so essentially asking the right question is 3/4 of solving a problem. If the building is on fire, you're not going to be asking what's happening to the beard of the alpha. You're going to be asking why the building is on fire. And so sometimes it's as obvious as that, sometimes it's a little bit more subtle. And I think curiosity and science go hand in hand because you will never be a good scientist if you are not curious. And so I would like for us to open our minds and think as widely as we possibly can about neurodiversity. Okay, so next slide, please. So, can we define neurodiversity? Neurodiversity essentially is the concept that differences in human brain wiring, functioning, and processing are natural variations rather than deficits. So, let's look at some keywords there. So, neurodiversity, of course, is a concept, okay, meaning that it's an idea that is challenging the norm, that is challenging the paradigm, that differences in human brain wiring, okay, so differences essentially suggest that there's a difference, okay, in human brain wiring. So brain wiring meaning that the connections between one part of the brain and the next, functioning and processing are natural variations, meaning that when you say natural, it means that they occur in nature. It's not something that is induced by something that is unnatural. So they are natural variations. They are things that can happen in the same way you don't know in which a person might be a boy or a girl before the egg and the sperm meet. It's the same way you don't know whether a person will be neurodivergent or not. That is what the concept of neurodiversity suggests. rather than deficits. So they're natural variations rather than deficits. And neurodiversity considers that people may differ in the following domains. How we interact with the world essentially depends on a lot of things. And these are the ways in which we interact with the world. We interact with the world through sensory processing. What can we see? What can we smell? What can we hear? What can we touch? So, neurodivergent people might define how they process sensory perception. Motor abilities. These motor abilities suggest that motor is, if you talk about a motor, you are talking about movements, whether it's a car, whether it's, but when it comes to your body, you're talking about how you move, whether it's raising your hand, putting your hand down, stretching your out and shaking a person, playing with toys and whatnot. Social comfort, because we interact with the world through social comfort. Because as humans, we are social animals and we cannot escape interacting with other human beings, whether we like it or not. And that forms such an integral and a core part of who we are as humans. And cognition, of course, suggests understanding, reasoning, memory, reproduction of the things that you have memorized and their use in a concerted and focused manner, and focus, of course, focus being things like attention, and so all these things, and of course, social comfort will, and cognition will involve speech as well. And so these are all the aspects um that are affected, that vary when it comes to neurodiversity. Next slide, please. So, what are some of the neurodivergent conditions that exist? Well, the hallmark and the prototype neurodivergent condition, of course, is autism, in which I'm sure, as we know, autism has a tendency for sameness, such that the person or the individual who has autism actually has a tendency to do certain things repeatedly, has impaired social interaction and communication, and to some extent also some speech and language challenges. But again, as we know, neurodivergence is a spectrum, and not everyone with autism is actually going to be on the spectrum where they will have difficulty with communicating to the same extent as the others. But there are those telltale signs that will tell you that this person is neurodivergent. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is characterized by inattention, which is the inability to actually pay attention and see tasks through. Hyperactivity, which of course involves the fact that the person is unable to sit still or stay still, even in situations where they ought to do so. And then impulsivity, in which they have a tendency to just interrupt, burst out, spend impulsively, and these are the things. Bipolar disorder, this developmental prosopagnosia, which of course is an inability of a person to recognize another's face, even close relatives. Dyslexia, which is a learning disability where reading becomes challenging, and the others here. Now, the reason why, of course, these conditions have been classified as possibly neurodivergent conditions rather than diseases is that, again, you will find out that they will vary in degree of severity. They will vary in degree of severity, such that some people with autism are fully functional, while others will require support, for the rest of their lives. And so what we're saying is that if you classify everyone as having a disease, there is a tendency for us to want to treat the disease and not pay attention to the person. We know if you give a butcher, or if you give meat to a carpenter, and all you give the carpenter is a hammer, what he's going to do is that he's going to want to hammer the meat. But what we're saying is that we're shifting from that mindset to say that we don't have to medicate everybody. Can we find support systems that emphasize strengths rather than deficits and help these people to live more inclusive lives? So Tourette syndrome, of course, was in the news recently. Intellectual disability, to whatever degree we find it. And so these are some of the neurodivergent conditions, autism, of course, being the most common. Next slide, please. So, To help us to understand, and this is a very technical aspect of things, and this was an aspect of training that in medical school that I wasn't particularly excited about. It's called embryology. Now, embryology is the study of how the fetus develops, right from the moment that the zygote forms to the formation of, the blastocyst, the embryo, those tiny cells. Because of course, you know that it is a sperm cell and an egg, and they come together, and then from one cell, it becomes two, it becomes eight, it becomes 16, it becomes 32, and so on and so on. And so in all those phases, very miraculous things are going on. The heart is being formed. The heart actually even begins to form before the mother even knows that she's pregnant. That is so remarkable. So remarkable. The neural tube, which is what is going to become the future spinal cord, is actually beginning to form before the mother knows that she's pregnant. You can see here, neural tube formation occurs in week 3 to 4. A woman might not know that she has missed her period, that she's pregnant, until about week 4. So by the time a woman has actually realized that she's pregnant, the neural tube is already forming, which, which we always talk about and say that the reality is that nature, unfortunately, has put a lot of the burden of the well-being of the child on the woman, which is why we always say, oh, take folic acid if you're a woman of childbearing age, because for a lot of women, they will simply not know that they are pregnant until the neural tube has already begun to form. And so, in this process, the neural plate folds into a tube. Essentially, what you need to know is that the spinal cord has already started to form. And so, the link to neurodiversity is that early structural variation in this neural tube can later influence different types of connectivity, because the spinal cord actually is made up of many cells that we call neurons, and these neurons connect to one another. And so if there is any unusual or any deviation from what is expected, then these connections can be disrupted. Now, by week 4 to 7, the brain vesicles are forming, whether it is the forebrain, and we're going to look at the functions of these parts of the brain, the midbrain, the hindbrain. And these formations, and when there are some disruptions, it can lead to subtle differences in shape and sensory language networks, and this can be linked to dyslexia, and it can lead to language-based divergence. Because the forebrain is where our language center is mainly, how we process language, how we understand what is being said to us. And so by week 4 to 7, subtle changes can lead to certain types of network abnormalities or network differences that can lead to language deficits and dyslexia. Next slide, please. So, just for us to understand that this process actually continues even to the 12th to the 20th week with neurogenesis and migration. Neurogenesis just means that the neural cells or our brain cells are forming and they're migrating and moving to the places where they are required. Now, altered migration patterns can affect organization in our higher centers, and this can lead to things like dyslexia, epilepsy, and some autistic traits. What about synaptogenesis and pruning? I think I need to mention this here. Now, we have cells called neurons in our brains, and neurons at the end of the neurons, they have connections with other neurons. Now, this synaptogenesis actually, and that's called a synapse. So when two neurons connect with one another, that is called a synapse. And when two synapses form between one another, it means that one brain cell can connect with the other and information is passed, which is why when you smell food that you are familiar with, it makes you feel nostalgic because the brain is connected. There's interconnectivity. When you smell a particular perfume, it reminds you of a time in your life when you were a child, any other sort of nostalgic feeling like that. And so that is how brain cells connect to one another and help you to actually take action. Or when you put your hand into a flame and you feel that hotness, there is a loop in which your body feels the heat through sensory nerves, and then it makes you react through motor nerves that makes you pull your hand immediately out of it. Without those fine connections and synapses, unfortunately, we will not be able to react so quickly to danger or dangerous situations. Now, this pruning is a situation in which the synapses that are not required are actually gotten rid of by the brain. Too many synapses are not necessary, and so the ones that are not necessary are gotten rid of by the brain. And with autism, there is reduced pruning, meaning that you have higher synaptic density, and with ADHD, there is also altered connectivity. So meaning that synapse formation as well as pruning are still very important processes to make sure that we individuals do not deviate from what is found in the general population. Next slide, please. So cortical folding occurs by week 20 to 40, and those variations also associated with dyslexia. Myelination, I think I need to just spend a little time on myelination. Now, myelination is a process in which a fatty layer of tissue is laid over our cells, over our brain cells. And then it occurs in late fetal life all the way into adolescence. And then axons are insulated for faster signaling. Axons are a particular part of the brain cells. And then you find out that with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, there can be delayed prefrontal myelination. The prefrontal part of the brain is the part that controls impulse, that controls self-regulation, and that controls impulse and satiety. And then autism too, there are differences in white matter connectivity. So at the end of the day, you just ask yourself, so why does any of this matter? And this is very technical stuff. You see, it's not me that went to go and do the CT scans and the MRIs that helped us to find out that there was cortical folding and myelination. So this speaks to the idea that even though the patient coming to me is coming with the complaints of symptoms, somebody said, you know what, let us study fetuses. Let us do MRIs for infants and then follow them up and see what differences exist that might make them have certain types of manifestations later in life. And so we need a holistic and interdisciplinary collaboration when it comes to neurodiversity, because the idea that science is static is false. It is constantly changing, it is constantly evolving. And as methods of investigating neurodiversity improve, including better methods of imaging the brain, like MRI, like more high definition MRIs, we can begin to see those differences that exist between the general population and individuals who have neurodivergent conditions, and see how we can actually make things better for them. Next slide, please. So what about postnatal refinements? From infancy into adolescence, pruning and myelination still occur, and then ongoing differences explain the diverse cognition, behavior, and learning styles. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about parts of the brain. Now, you can see here, this yellow part is the frontal lobe. And if you see what the, function of the frontal lobe is, it controls higher cognitive functions and voluntary movement. And as we know, taking autism as an example, the frontal lobe is the part of the brain that is connected with behavior. So behavior and higher center thinking, whether it is thinking, imagining, understanding emotions, so the frontal lobe is very, very important in that. What about the parietal lobe? Parietal lobe is the pink one. So it processes sensory information such as touch and spatial perception. As we know, children that have autism, they are very, very sensitive. I had a patient and, I was asked to review a book actually for a parent who had written a book about autism because two of her children are living with autism. And what she wrote in the book was that cutting the hair of one of the children was a nightmare because the sound and the buzzing of the clipper was something that he could not get over. It was so disturbing that going for a haircut became such a nightmare, and his hair grew very wild like John the Baptist. He was so, but eventually they were able to overcome that, because they were able to do some sort of gradual desensitization by using a quieter clipper and then gradually introducing him to it. So the parietal lobe is in charge of sensory information, and sometimes the hypersensitivity to noise, to textures, even textures of food are actually affected by the parietal lobe in terms of our perception of the textures of food. What about the temporal lobe? The temporal lobe, which is the green part, that handles hearing, memory, and processing of auditory information. You can see the spinal cord there, and that is the communication channel between the brain and the body for motor and sensory functions. The cerebellum coordinates balance, posture, and precise muscle movements. So all these parts of the brain come together to make sure that we are fully functional. And as you know, children who live with neurodivergent conditions, whether it is dyslexia or autism in particular, you find out that they might have stimming. And you know what stimming is? Stimming is when they have a repetitive movement that usually, I think for them, stimming comes when they're excited or when they require some kind of comfort. And so the interaction of the brain, whether it's the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, and the temporal lobe, come into play when they need to regulate themselves, when they need to find comfort and move in a certain way that we know that they do because it gives them that sense of comfort. Next slide, please. Sorry, this was the wrong slide. Okay, so alterations in structure can lead to alterations in function. So this means that if a person was to fracture their arm, okay, that is an alteration in structure. If a person was to fracture their arm, I'm sure that they will not be able to lift things up. They will not be able to go to the gym. They will not be able to do anything that is functionally targeted or directed. So they are going to need to be in a cast. And so when it comes to anatomy, whenever the anatomy of an organ is disrupted, then the function of that organ usually is disrupted. And so when it comes to the brain, if we consider sensory modalities, you know, that the brain actually takes care of as some sort of example, the affected area is sensory processing, and the examples in neurodivergence are hypersensitivity and sensory overload. What about the cognitive areas of the brain? Executive function include things like writing, deciding to do things, deciding not to do things. With ADHD, they have either poor focus, and some people that have autism have hyper focus. You see how they are fixated on very specific things. They will explain something to you down to the finest and most minute detail that you will be astounded at as to how hyper focused they are on very specific things. What about motor? And with the motor modality, you have praxis and coordination. And so praxis essentially is the ability to make coordinated movements, you know, so to say that I'm going to pick up this cup, and that's exactly what you do. Some people, they can say they want to pick up the cup, but they miss the cup. They go to the side of the cup everywhere else, or they have some sort of tremor in approaching the cup. And so when there is a challenge with movement and coordination, then that is dyspraxia. And then there can be clumsiness, and then there can be fine motor difficulties. What about language? There can be challenges with literacy and numeracy, in which there can be dyslexia, difficulty with reading, dyscalculia, which is difficulty with solving simple arithmetic. Now, with the social functioning, there can be social cognition issues, as we can see in autism, non-verbal cue misinterpretation. I know that we're all Africans here. And can you just put it in the comment section for me? How, when, for instance, you know, you would go out and maybe your mom or your dad didn't want you to do something, how would they let you know without using any words? What would they do without using any words? Because let me see if we're all raised in here in Africa, because I know that there are Nigerians here, there are people from other countries here. So facial expressions, exactly. What kind of facial expressions? They might body language, exactly. Sometimes they will just eye you. Mama will eye you. Say my mama will eye you. Eh? So gesticulation. And some of them, they'll squeeze their mouth, they'll do their face. They'll give you one kind of body language. But you see, the problem is that sometimes, of course, as we know, in terms of social recognition, some children with and I use the word, and I'm saying children, because again, that's who I interact with. But some individuals will not just get that your cue. You can do all the non-verbal cues and body language from now till the donkeys come home, but they're not going to answer you. Next slide, please. So, when it comes to neurodiversity, we know that there are many factors that can lead to these alterations that can lead to neurodiversity. And genes are a very interesting new field of scientific endeavor in so many ways. Because we do know that there are some genetic diseases that occur that can be lethal. Some can be debilitating, can lead to significant disability. Some are just simply a nuisance. And so the idea behind genetics and genetic studies is that we are trying to determine if there are ways in which we can tweak the genes that are abnormal in one way or the other by adding or removing abnormal parts of that gene to correct the problem, to correct the issue. Now, as far as we know, there is no one single specific gene that has been identified to be associated with neurodiversity. Now, polygenic inheritance means that dozens to hundreds of genetic variants combine to increase the risk of somebody being neurodivergent. And unfortunately, genes are usually probabilistic, not deterministic, such that the fact that you have a gene or the fact that a parent has a gene that they can pass on to a child doesn't mean that they will necessarily inherit that gene. So, having risk genes does not guarantee a condition, but it raises the likelihood. Then there's a shared genetic architecture such that autism, ADHD, and dyslexia often share overlapping genetic risk factors, explaining why sometimes they co-occur. Which is why whenever we're evaluating children with ADHD, we evaluate them for autism. Whenever we are evaluating children for autism, we evaluate them for ADHD and dyslexia and other neurodivergent conditions. Now, what about the gene and environment interaction? Prenatal environment, nutrition, stress, and early experiences influence how genetic predispositions manifest. Now, we have something that we call epigenetics, in which sometimes, there can be an individual who has a risk factor or who has a gene that is abnormal, but the fact that the child or the individual was exposed to a particular stressor puts an epigenetic marker. It's not the gene, but it is just an alteration in the gene that is so tiny that is not even considered as part of the gene, but it will now make the condition manifest. That is what we call epigenetics. And so sometimes environmental stressors, nutrition, early experiences in life can actually affect how a gene might manifest. Next slide, please. So what about environmental risk factors for neurodivergence? And I'm still going to talk about why we are calling these risk factors, because usually when you hear the word risk factors, you're thinking about a disease. But you see, and one of the questions that I asked in my pre-lecture exercise was that, do you think WHO and the American Academy of the American Psychiatric Association should remove neurodivergent conditions from their list of diseases? I guess we can have the opportunity to discuss that later. So, environmental risk factors. This include prenatal alcohol consumption by the mother, fetal alcohol syndrome, and then fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, and then maternal infections like rubella, cytomegalovirus, and Zika virus, air pollution as well, including particulate matter, traffic exhaust, toxic metals, including lead and mercury exposure, pesticides and chemicals, including organophosphates, phthalates, and I think this BPAs. They use it in plastics and a few other things. And then socioeconomic factors like poverty, poor nutrition, and stress. Now, these are all environmental risk factors that have been associated with neurodivergence. But that being said, the fact that the person is exposed to these things does not necessarily mean that they will be neurodivergent. There has to be an interaction between the genes and the environment for the neurodivergent conditions to manifest. Next slide, please. So I have brought up this the MMR and autism myth because when it comes to environmental risk factors that people have associated with neurodivergence, particularly autism, the MMR vaccine has been at the forefront of the accused of the accused culprits for neurodivergence and for autism in particular. And this is where science can clash with reality. So let me just first of all say that science is not always, sometimes science doesn't serve the purpose of good. The reason why a lot of individuals, then justified the transatlantic slave trade is that some people actually drew up a hierarchy of the races based on measurement of skull size, measurement of how attractive the skull of of individuals they found were. Because there was one particular scientist, he found the skull of humans in the Caucasus Mountains, which of course, had mostly white people. And he felt that, so this skull of the all the skulls I've examined, this is the skull that seems the prettiest, that seems the finest. Meanwhile, what is pretty or what is fine is very subjective. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But in that case, he now said that, you know what, I'm going to call people that are of this skin tone Caucasians because he was found it in the Caucasus Mountains, and he felt that that was the most beautiful of the skulls that he had examined, and so that's how it came about Caucasians. And somehow, some people managed to just use that kind of pseudoscience to grade or to rate or to stratify races into the order of superiority. And of course, we all know where we, as dark-skinned Africans, ended up on that scale. That being said, when it came to MMR and autism, till today, people still feel that the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine causes autism, even though there have been numerous studies to debunk this. Now, what study actually precipitated this? This study was done by Dr. Andrew Wakefield, who published a paper in The Lancet in 1998 claiming that the MMR vaccine caused intestinal inflammation that can lead to autism. Number one, the data was fraudulent. Andrew Wakefield altered medical histories to fit his hypothesis. So it was wuru-wuru to the answer. Rather than walk from your question to the answer, you walk from your answer back to the question. You look for specific patients that just fit the answer that you were looking for. It's like, okay, I want to find out if Agberos I want to find out if there is a difference between the rate at which Agbero smoke Indian hemp and how people, people that live in a gated community in Banana Island smoke Indian hemp. And what I do is that I go straight to Oshodi, and those are the only people that I interview to ask them whether they are smoking Indian hemp. Of course, I'm going to come out with my results telling me that more people, more Agberos smoke Indian hemp than people in the gated community. If I don't go and talk to the gated community people, or if I talk to fewer people in the gated community people, so essentially, he just essentially just made his study tailored to what exactly it was he was trying to find, and that is bad science. So, what about conflict of interest? He was paid by lawyers preparing lawsuits against the vaccine manufacturers. What about his sample size? How many children did he interview to make sure that he drew valid conclusions? Only 12 children. And that is not representative or statistically valid because we know that there is a minimum population sample. If you know basic statistics or basic research methodology in clinical medicine or in research, then you know that there is a minimum sample population that is required for you to be able to draw valid conclusions, and 12 was definitely not required, not adequate. What about media amplification? Once that And you see, the Lancet is a very, very, very prestigious journal. If you are published in the Lancet as a scientist, if me, I'm published in the Lancet, if I publish in the Lancet, before Ebukwa and Pascal see me to tell me to come and give lecture, they will have to sign several documents, provide DNA sample, because that is how prestigious it is to be published in the Lancet. And so it was easy for the media to sensationalize it, to take it far and wide. And unfortunately, once that kind of information gets out, to retrieve it is very challenging. Even though numerous studies have come to establish that there is no link between the MMR vaccine and autism, but what is done is already done. And so this is something that it is now an uphill battle, to get rid of it. So essentially, my point is that science has to be done responsibly. Science and neurodivergence in interacting in a way that is counterproductive can cause both short-term and long-term damage. Next slide, please. So what about investigating neurodiversity? The pediatrician is usually the first port of call when it comes to diagnosing individuals that have neurodivergent conditions. A mother might come, a parent might come and say that my child is not talking. He's not maintaining eye contact with me. He's not interacting the way I expect him to interact. And so a lot of parents want to ask me, what tests can we do to diagnose what is going on? And it is one of the most difficult things, one of the most challenging things in medical and clinical practice to say there's no test that we can do to diagnose what is going on here. And they're like, really, no tests? Unfortunately, it is not all medical conditions that have tests that you can run to make the diagnosis. For some of these conditions, you make what we call a clinical diagnosis, such that the diagnosis can only be made by interviewing the patients, carrying out a physical examination, and observing trends and patterns. And that is how we make the diagnosis of neurodivergent conditions in most of the cases. So no laboratory tests exist to help us make or confirm the diagnosis of neurodiversity. It has to be done by interview and observation. Tests can be done to rule out other possible causes of the manifestations. So for instance, if a child is actually not speaking or not speaking on time, then the first question that we ask is that, is this child actually hearing properly? We must make sure that the hearing is intact. As a matter of fact, what they do, in the US and I think in the UK to some extent, is that there's universal hearing screening for every newborn. So there's no newborn that is born in the US unless you decline, no, and if you decline, they will not start looking at you with one kind of funny eye. You must have universal hearing screening done for the newborn so that if they need to intervene on time, then they do so to prevent speech delays. So if say child with speech delay, we run hearing tests, not to diagnose neurodiverse conditions, but to rule out the fact that the child is not hearing. Because once the hearing is corrected, then the speech will be acquired. Okay, so this is also done when neurodiversity is associated with comorbidities like epilepsy. Unfortunately, these brain alterations can alter more than one aspect of the child's thinking. And so a child with autism can have epilepsy, a child with ADHD can have epilepsy. And so to diagnose those conditions, these are some of the things that we do. So lab and imaging tests in neurodiversity evaluation. So this helps us to rule out the differential diagnosis or to rule out other conditions that might mimic neurodivergence conditions and to find associated conditions. For instance, full blood counts, thyroid function tests, metabolic panel, lead and toxin levels, MRI and brain scans to rule out tumors, EEG, which is our electroencephalogram, to rule out epilepsy. We also need to do metabolic screening to rule out inborn errors of metabolism. Now, these inborn errors of metabolism are conditions that can actually lead to a buildup of chemicals and harmful substances in the body that can actually lead to things like hearing loss, liver damage. Chromosomal testing is also very important. Unfortunately, I think this is where in Africa we're a little bit behind. So chromosomal analysis is not widely available, and where it is extremely expensive, prohibitively so. And so a lot of our children end up not doing it. And then once you have done all these things and rule out all these things, then of course you need a plan and then support strategies for our children and our individuals with neurodiverse conditions. Next slide, please. So, science and neurodiversity and the future, what are we looking at? So, when it comes to genetics, we can do polygenic mapping such that we are finding out what genes cause neurodiverse conditions. We are looking at what pathways are shared. One of the things that I actually put in the pre-lecture activity is the idea that what would you want research and science to do as far as neurodiversity is concerned? And I'm rounding up soon. Because when you look at why WHO in their International Classification of Diseases and the American Psychiatry Association in their DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, still have neurodivergent conditions listed as diseases. It is because if you give parents of neurodiverse children a choice between would you like your neurodiverse child to still remain neurodiverse or would you like them to not be neurodiverse if you could wave a wand? I tell you, I've not interviewed them, but I'm very confident that 90% will say that they do not want their children to be neurodiverse because the requirements for support, the requirements for learning, for day-to-day living are so enormous, are so astronomical, which is why elsewhere, and I'm sure we're going to discuss, in subsequent lectures, the social aspects of managing neurodiversity, which science cannot divorce itself from, because at the end of the day, it will still come back on the scientific community to try to find answers to these challenges. To say that conditions, neurodiverse conditions are still listed as diseases because science has not found a way to make it more manageable for individuals. So they are still listed as impairments, and I'm not sure that that will change for some time unless we can find a way to find new modalities of managing, these conditions that are as scientific as we can possibly make them. So with epigenetics and genetic mapping, we're talking about actually gene therapy to see if we can actually, eliminate those alterations altogether, if that is possible. Brain networks through imaging, we're finding connectivity differences, neuroimaging, and then dynamic systems. What about molecular biology? Synaptic proteins might be studied to find out if we can give supplements, who knows, that can actually make this communication between brain cells more efficient. And then environmental studies, whether it is prenatal factors, childhood experiences, and then the cultural context that might actually help us to understand neurodiversity a little bit more. What about the challenges? Representation. Neurodivergence has very minimal representation, both in science, in government, and in advocacy. So this is why Punuka Foundation is here to help us to understand what's going on. And so co-production and participatory research, of course, is the way forward with that. Methodology, it needs to be rigid. The problem is that right now, methodology is too rigid, and then there are too many exclusionary tools. Then we must be more flexible and then have more inclusive methods of introducing, of including subjects, of including participants in our studies. Workplace integration needs to strengthen So workplace integration needs to strengthen sustainable HR practices. What about ethics and power? Well, we need to have more equity-driven and dignity-focused frameworks. And then with interdisciplinary gaps, we need an integrated and collaborative scientific method. Neurodiversity, unfortunately, is not unfortunately, I think it's here to stay with us. Neurodiversity is not going anywhere. It's not going, we are going to forever have neurodiverse people, and so we've got to come up with the answers one way or the other. Let me just bring it to the African context. Funding for mainstream research is very limited. We are not funding the one that is glaring in our eyes: diarrhea, pneumonia, non-communicable diseases, health emergencies. We are not funding research for those things. So people with neurodiversity, unfortunately, are at the fringes because people are not aware. So who is funding research for neurodiversity? That sometimes requires that people be followed up for years, from birth till or from when they are diagnosed till when they die. Who is going to fund that kind of follow-up? I think is a food cause is food for thought for us. So the science of neurodiversity involves various aspects, including genetics, environment, and research. The aim is to understand how variations in human behavior arise as a result of differences in brain structure and function. This is to help better tailor support systems around scientifically proven evidence. With these few points of mine, I hope you have been able to acquire a more robust understanding of the science of neurodiversity. Thank you very much.
Wow, awesome, awesome. That was a very, very wonderful section. Thank you so much, Doc. Thank you
Thank you,
so
Pascal.
much for your time, for the type of dedication you gave to this particular topic. Yes. So I want us all to go to the chat box and thank our facilitator for today. Just within a few minutes. Okay. Type in the chat room. Thank you, Doc. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm very, very sure that all of us have so many questions already, or rather, some of us have questions, and I'm sure that Doc will be more than willing to answer them. So, as usual, if you have any question, you can simply indicate in the chat, can raise your hand, then you will be asked to unmute and you can ask your questions. So, in the next 20 seconds, if you have any questions, okay. Nasir has question. Okay.
Thank you very much, Doctor. That was a very wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pascal. So my question is, there was a part where you explained synapse, that's two neurons forming together, and implying that it's what sort of gives us memory to be able to understand things that we've, like recognize things that we've done before. So to smell. So I was going to say, for people with ADHD, right? Do Because like at what age does the synapse stops forming, or does it like form for life? And then for people with ADHD, do do certain medications alter these synapses? I hope I'm
Yes,
able to communicate
your
that.
question is very clear. Your question is clear. I thank you so much, Nasir. I totally understand what you mean. So yes, so essentially, synapses are connections that exist between one neuron and another. And what they do is that they actually help. The more synapse a person has, the more quickly the brain is able to communicate with different seemingly unrelated parts of itself. So memory, for instance, memory is the part of the part that controls memory, which is the hippocampus, and then the part that controls smell. They are quite different. But you see, the idea that you can remember somebody or something based on something that you just smelled is testament to the effectiveness of synaptic connections and synapses. Synapses exist in the billions in our brain and spinal cord and in our central nervous system. Now, we do not have synapses forever. We lose some synapses that are not required. Synapses work on the basis of use or lose. For instance, if you are learning piano and you keep at it and you keep at it and you keep at it repeatedly, new synapses are being formed between the parts of your brain that are involved with hearing, the part of your brain involved with movement of your fingers, and the part of your brain involved with seeing because you're looking at the keys, you are moving your fingers on the keys, you are hearing the notes. And so the synapses that actually help you to execute these very complex tasks are going to be strengthened. But for things that you aren't doing very often, the brain loses those synapses. Now, specifically for children that have ADHD and then medications, because right now, the medications that we use to treat children with ADHD, rather than affect structure in terms of the synapses, they affect function. And so what they do is that they are stimulants. And so which I think, it seems very counterintuitive. So for instance, some of the drugs that we use, including what we call methylphenidate, it actually is a stimulant. And how it works is that it stimulates the parts of or stimulates chemicals in the brain that inhibits neural activity. So, in other words, we are giving fire and fuel to the part of the brain that tells the brain to be calming down. So we are not altering synaptic number, we're not altering synaptic function. We are sending a chemical signal to the brain by the drugs that we're administering to say that regardless of the number of synapses that you have, please don't be as stimulated. So we are telling the inhibitory neurons to produce more chemicals to calm the brain down. So even though we call it a stimulant, the ultimate effect is that it actually calms down the excessive functioning of, neurons involved with hyperactivity and activity and whatnot, and focus and attention. So we are doing a chemical sort of intervention, not a physical or synaptic one. So the synapses are intact in that situation. Thank you, Nasir.
Yes, awesome, awesome. Okay,
Thank you very
Dr.
much. Thank you very much.
Yes, you're welcome. Dr. SK,
Yeah, thank you very
Professional
much,
Student
Dr.
Economics.
Ayo. Yeah, good
Yes, we
evening,
can hear you,
sir.
Dr. SK. Yes, great.
Yeah, thank you very much for that wonderful lecture. In fact, very, very impactful, and in fact, a very fantastic lecture. So my question goes thus: for a family that they never had maybe any antecedent of maybe any cases of neurodiversity, but fortunately, unfortunately for the maybe for the mom, the second child happens to be a neurodivergent person, second child, and tracing the history, they could not trace it anywhere in the family,
Mm,
both from the father
mm,
and the mother. So it becomes a
mm,
bigger issue. So what could be the
mm,
reason?
mm,
And the second one, has there been a study that shows the life expectancy of a neurodivergent patient? Maybe how
mm.
long they can stay, or there is a time bound towards their livelihood. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much. I think these are very important questions, Dr. SK. So now, in terms of, in Africa, what we usually do is that before you marry a person, depending on, the kind of family you come from, they will go to the village and go and ask about inherited conditions, epilepsy, schizophrenia, mental health disorders, things like that, things that they feel can be inherited, and they say, that family, they have problem, oh, don't go and marry them, or you give birth to children that have so and so. And of course, we know that genes don't work like that. So sometimes a person or parents might actually carry a mutated gene that was quiet. Mother has the gene, father has the gene, but unfortunately, by some, would I say, stroke of is this not maybe by some stroke of fate, no, let me not say ill fate, by some stroke of fate, it just so happened that these two people that have this strange mutation just happen to have met themselves. Not only did they meet themselves, they fell in love with themselves. Not only fell in love with themselves, they decided that, you know what, we're going to go ahead and get married. And what's the result? Genetic manifestation of two carriers coming together will be that they will manifest giving birth to two children who are neurodiverse, whether it is autism or ADHD. Sometimes it might be that both children inherited a gene from just one parent, but they were both exposed to an environmental stressor that made a gene that would have been quiet appear in real life. But you see, this has real life implications, as you've said, for questions like, this is not in my family. This is not. So the father is saying it's not in my family. The mother is saying it's not in my family. So whose family is it in? Is it my family? Is it in my own family? So whose family is it in? And so it brings up the issue of infidelity that, oh, okay, did you do something, outside? And of course, usually the women are the brunt of these kinds of, unfortunate accusations, So these are the things. And so, which is why genetic testing is so important, such that if we see a child number one, who was neurodiverse, if we had a full panel of all the genes that can be responsible for neurodivergent condition, then we can just run a sample of the child's blood through a panel to say that, okay, of the 3,000 genes that we've identified that are associated with neurodivergence, which one does this child have? Or which environmental factor was this child exposed to that can tell us that, okay, this child was neurodivergent because of this. And that way we can do genetic counseling to say that, madam, because we have identified this gene in this your first child, then it means that for your second child, the risk is going to be 20% or 30%. But because the knowledge of neurodiversity is actually quite limited, so we really will just have to go on conjecture and say that clearly it's something genetic. And you see, what I've found with these situations is that the parents become so terrified to give birth to another child. They are so scared because they're like, I don't want the third child to now come and have neurodiverse conditions as well. So these are the social aspect of things that we have to deal with, unfortunately. Sorry, I've rambled on. Sorry, Dr. SK, could you repeat the second question?
Okay. Well, awesome. Thank
The
you so much,
second
Dr.
question,
Bernard.
Yes, second
please,
question, please.
second question has not been answered. Maybe the
Yes,
life
yes, second question.
expectancy for a neurodivergent, life expectancy, how long can
Life
they live?
expectancy, yes. So children, individuals with neurodiversity actually have a so neurodiversity, as we know, is on a very wide spectrum of things. So individuals who require minimal support for dressing, for function, who are fully functional, they have a life expectancy that is that of the general population. So if a Nigerian neurodiverse person is able to go to work by himself, can dress for himself, can feed himself, they will be expected to live to the 54 years that they say Nigerian men live to. They are not expected to die before then. But for individuals who have um, great, have a high amount, high needs, high number of needs, for dressing, for physical, for movement, for general physical sustenance, so to say, in resource-rich settings, because the resources are available to them. As a matter of fact, literally, the government gives subvention to individuals and parents who have neurodiverse children. But such things don't exist here. So unfortunately, the life expectancy for such children here is actually shortened, unfortunately. But for neurodiverse individuals who are fully functional independently, the life expectancy is not different from that, is normal in essence. Yeah, thank you. I think Tonia's hand is up.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ayodele. You are great. Those of us from early childhood and primary education, that's how we greet. We say you are great. Thank you for that. I think I'm coming from the aspect of the social perspective now. How do we handle parents that are in denial? That's how I put it. When you see traces like a child who is hyperactive, a child who has autism, and you're trying to draw attention, what do we do? How do you go to see a specialist? How do you diagnose and all that? The parents will tell you that my child does not have all that. I don't know. They will continue to deny this fact that there's need for you to help this child. How do we handle such cases? Then the second thing I want you to also look at or tell us, it's on, I don't know if I should call it a might. There is this understanding that those children that are neurodivergent are wired differently, that they are very good in maybe coding, things like that, all these kind of, do I call it coding, actually, anything that has to do with a very serious kind of mental thing, that they are wired in such a way that they are very good at all those things. What's your take on it? Thank you.
So, Tonya, you two, you are great. I must acknowledge that. So, you guys, we are all great here. Thank you so much. So, on the first aspect of denial, Tonya, this is a very important, question. Denial is the first stage of grief. If you know the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance, then you know how it goes. So denial is always the first, because it's grief. It is grief. Because the last thing that you want is a child that is different from other children, regardless of what the difference is like. Of course, if the difference is that they are geniuses, then a parent can deal with that. But a difference that makes interacting with others more challenging, a difference that makes interacting with you, the parents, more challenging, a difference that makes them have challenges with acquiring language, something as straightforward as language, is denial. That is the first stage of grief. So these are grieving parents, which is why we cannot do it alone. Counselors, clinical psychologists are so indispensable when it comes to the holistic management of families of children that have autism. The reality is that whenever people come to us, and this is something that we can actually adopt from the playbook of people that don't want to receive vaccines. What is said is that at every opportunity that you get when they come to the visit, you must still offer them the vaccine, just in case somehow they will accept. So unfortunately, in the most empathetic manner that we can do it, we must make them understand that the more we delay interventions, the less likely it is that the child will develop functional social functioning, learning capacity, understanding of their environment, and the parent understanding what the child needs. So hmm, that delay will make things worse off for the parents. So there's only one way we can do it: continuous reinforcement of how the child can actually be made to adapt to his environment. Now, on the special skills that children with neurodiversity have. Unfortunately, there's not every child that has neurodiversity that actually has these very special skills. And it is a little bit disingenuous to tell parents that that is the case. That is every child that has autism that is going to be able to tell apart, all the keys in the house at a glance, or that remembers all the elements in the periodic table, or that is good in coding. Some of them are just like the rest of us. They don't know coding and they will never know coding. And you've got to tailor the child's strengths, or the child's education and the child's environment to their strengths, which is why observing and listening to the child is so important. Whether it is verbal skills, reading skills, calculation skills, whatever strengths the child has should actually be consolidated to make sure that they have independent lives. Thank you very much, Tony.
Okay, great. Hello, Faith, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much, Dr. Ayodele Renner. Thank you so much. So my question is, at what age can one tell that, okay, this child has some form of trait of neurodivergence in him or her? At what age? And also for infants, and when should we start looking, what month or what time should we start looking at their developmental milestone, if this child is reaching their developmental milestone? So when should we start looking out for things like that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Faith. And I think this comes to the heart of early diagnosis. Comes to the heart of early diagnosis. Now, there is a screening tool, and I'm sure you are going to be introduced to in this course, even if you are not. Let me just put it in the down. Now, the MCHAT, which is the modified checklist for autism in toddlers, is a screening tool that a lot of my early child education and my other early years experts are familiar with. I put it in the chat there. So the MCHAT stands for the Modified Checklist for Autism in Toddlers. Now, this questionnaire is usually administered to children between the ages of 16 and 30 months who may be at risk of autism. Now, one of the reasons why we would administer this checklist is because a parent has said that my child is not talking. So, the speech milestones are so important when it comes to developing, or when it comes to getting a suspicion that a child might actually have autism. So what are we referring to when we say the speech milestones? Because a lot of parents might not realize that their 10-month-old should be babbling, should be doing blah, 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 blah. So depending on the level of enlightenment, awareness of the parents, they might not realize that the fact that my 10-month-old is not making any sounds is unusual, and so they might not complain. By 12 months, between 12 months and 16 months, thereabouts, 16 to 18 months, the child should be using one-word sentences. Come, go, no, water. They might have about 30 words in their vocabulary. By the time the child is 2 years, they will be saying the things that they are hearing you say at home. Up NEPA, hallelujah, shut up. So, if we find out, for instance, that by 2 years, a child has no words at all, that is definitely a red flag. A child at 1 year, not saying any words at all, definitely a red flag. For us, the other things that we look out for, and this is why well baby clinics are very important. The idea that parents will give birth, and then the only reason why they'll take the child to the hospital is during immunization is actually not what it's supposed to be. They should actually go for a clinic where they sit down with a doctor with a checklist to say, developments, what is the speech like? Motor, is he crawling yet? Speech, is he babbling? Social, is he maintaining eye contact with you? Is he smiling at others? Is he waving bye-bye? Because when a child comes into the toddler, comes into the consulting room to see me, I expect that he should look directly at me because I'm a suspicious individual. I'm somebody that he's unfamiliar with, and so he should look me directly in the eye until I get uncomfortable and I look away. But when a toddler comes to my consulting room and they are looking elsewhere, not maintaining eye contact with me, I get a little bit concerned because that is not how typical toddlers behave. They should maintain eye contact with you. I did a skit today on my page to say that toddlers always bring things to their parents, whether it is remote control, whether it is broom, mop. Toddlers are constantly giving you presents that you don't want, and that is just their way of socially interacting. So one of the questions in this MChat is to ask, does your child bring things to you? Things that they are interested in. If they're interested in dustbin, in packer, in a shoe, they will bring it to you to share in that interest, share my interest with me. So when children by 16 months to 30 months are not doing those things, it is a red flag for us that autism is a possibility here, meaning that autism can be diagnosed as early, or not diagnosed, can be suspected as early as 10 months to 1 year when the child is not maintaining eye contact, not smiling, not waving bye-bye, not having any kind of speech at all. But unfortunately, it cannot be diagnosed until the child is at least 2 years, when you can actually carry out the formal observations that exist. But once it is suspected, early intervention is key to success. Thank you.
Okay, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Doc, for that wonderful answer. Thank you so much. Is there any question from another person? Any question? Any other questions? Okay, I don't think there's any other questions. Thank you so much, Doc, for this wonderful section. We truly appreciate you for your time. We do not take it for granted. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. For one, I learned a lot of things, and I'm sure that all of us here learned a lot of things. Thank you for contributing to this fellowship. Thank you, and may God bless you abundantly.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Pascal, and thank you very much, everyone, for your active participation and contribution to the lectures. Very appreciative of your active participation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and you're welcome. So, without no further ado, this section is officially over. But before then, Doc, I don't know if you have any post-section tasks for us.
So no, I haven't got any. I haven't got any post activity. Just discuss. Just feel free to discuss or ask any other questions that you might have in the classroom.
In the classroom. Okay. All right.
Actually,
So
I think you can actually just even use the pre lecture discussions as the post discussions, and just have fun with it and have a go at it. Yeah.
All right. Okay, no problem. Okay. So thank you so much, everyone, for making out the time to be here in this section. And please, before we go, please, for whenever we have our sections holding, we actually open the meeting room at least 10 minutes before the time, so you can join early enough, so that we can start at exactly the time we said. Because most times, because of the lateness, we start maybe a few minutes late or something like that. Okay, so please let us work on that. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful night rest. Thank you. So the meeting is officially open now.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye. Good night.